we hear of San Franciscans all the time talking about how they're moving away from San Francisco because it's just so hard to live here. Perhaps they've been pushed out because of how expensive it is. Maybe their rent is too high. Maybe it's just not enough to make a living, which then creates these long traffic lines, commutes, because perhaps they're living further out in the Bay Area or in the peninsula, or sometimes they relocate to Sacramento, or even out of state even, right? So I want to know, if you're elected mayor, what policies or initiatives do you think can help renters and owners right now? This is beyond sort of the concept of building more housing to prevent displacement. What do you think policies and initiatives that can be done right now that can help renters and owners stay in their homes and prevent the loss of existing rental housing? Let's go backwards this time. So Amy, we'll start with you.
Well, I grew up in the Bay Area, and I've lived in a variety of different places, including Portland, and it's always felt to me and my friends that San Francisco, you gotta hustle a little bit harder to stay here, right? You know, it's a little bit harder than other places, and I felt personally, since I've been here in 2007, I've been displaced twice, and it's really devastating, and I felt like the city was trying to spit me out, but I decided that I grew roots here. I went to SF State for organizational development. I grew roots here for the first time in a long time, and so I have held on with everything I have, and a lot of people in this room have as well. But what we can do, number one, Costa-Hawkins repeal. Let's make sure that we can extend rent control to everyone so we don't have a landlord that can increase the rent just because they want to the next month. So everybody in this room, please do petition gathering for Costa-Hawkins because that's so important. There's another thing on the ballot as well, which is the right to counsel. And it's so important that we pass that. So people here, some of you gathered signatures for that. Everybody, if they are under threat of eviction, needs that support. And we also need the level before that where it's mediation. And so I've been talking to some small property owners, and I was a small property owner with the Community Land Trust when I worked there as operations manager. And I had to actually negotiate some move-out agreements with people because people were threatening other people that they lived with, and it wasn't the right situation for them. But we always cared where they landed, and that's really important too. And so with that in mind, if we can get to this place where anybody who is being evicted, there's a first level of mediation support for some of the, between the property owner and the tenant, and then if it turns out that the person who's the tenant needs that additional support, then we should definitely do that. But I've talked to a lot of property owners that have said that they don't actually rent out all their units. And so we have to do something around vacancy taxes because supply and demand does not work when you can withhold supply. Are you with me on that? Thanks.
Yes. The question is, what initiatives and policies could you implement now to keep renters and owners in their place and protect existing rental housing?
Okay. So whereas only about 10% of San Franciscans can afford to purchase market rate housing, only about 15% of us can afford to rent market rate housing. So the need for affordable housing stock for renters is crucial. And our most valuable affordable housing stock for renters is our rent-controlled units. And that's why I have focused so much on the Ellis Act in recent years. My first year in Sacramento, working with many of you in the room, I was able to amend the Ellis Act, the only time it's ever been amended, to exempt single-room occupancies, SROs. And when we did that, we protected over 12,000 of San Francisco's most vulnerably housed, those this close to eviction and becoming homeless. And when we're talking about displacement and eviction, we know that we're also talking about the possibility of homelessness. So for those who have a home, we have to do everything within our power to keep them in their homes. It's much more expensive for taxpayers to help someone get off the street than to stay in their home. And so that means, yes, legal assistance to keep folks who are challenged in their tenancy, to succeed in fighting that challenge. And additionally, of course, rental assistance. Again, better spent up front rather than the back end after people have already been evicted. The city can also invest in taking buildings and units off the speculative market. Housing used to be a place where we lived, not a commodity that is being bought and sold on international speculative markets. So just a few ideas of how we can and must keep people in their homes.
Thank you, Mr. Leno. Ms. Kim.
So how do we keep tenants and families in place in their home today? One, I was proud to work with many of you in this room today to pass Eviction Protection 2.0 in 2015, where we, thank you, stemmed the tide of low-fault evictions throughout San Francisco, and we have seen a dramatic drop in these types of evictions where landlords were evicting tenants because they were repainting their bedroom walls and leaving their bicycles in common areas, or like in Chinatown, hanging their laundry out of their bedroom. And for the first time ever instituted vacancy rent control on owner move-in evictions for 5 years when landlords do OMIs to make sure that they were truly doing an owner move-in eviction where rent increases would not matter to that owner. We need to continue to protect tenants and also to stabilize our rent control buildings today. For every 2 units of affordable housing we build, we lose a rent-controlled unit to demolition, condo conversion, Ellis Act evictions, and others. And so right now, we're in many ways just running in place, and we have a lot more work to do to help preserve our existing rent control stock. Amy had mentioned our small site acquisition fund. I've been a huge proponent of it. Our district has allocated more than $10 million to add to this fund through developer fees in Rincon Hill, and we purchased at least 4 buildings here in District 6, 1 on Turk, 2 on Natoma, 1 on Folsom Street, where we were able to protect those residents and keep them in place so that they weren't evicted into the speculative market. We also need to pass a speculators tax again. Proposition G, which many of us here in the room supported, we need to bring that back to make sure that we are taking the incentive out of the greed incentivized sales that we're seeing throughout the city. The vast majority of evictions, by the way, target the most vulnerable of residents. They target the elderly, people who speak English as a second language, and individuals with disabilities. And we know, oh,
Sorry.
okay. Do we have a timekeeper?
Well, so we've got one right here, and I'll wrap you up.
Got it.
But yes, we can talk more to that. Obviously, it sounds like we are engaged audience. We know what we're talking about. We've got our good definitions about housing. So one reminder before we get to Ms. Aliotti over here. One, we're also following the discussion on social media. We're using the hashtag SF Housing Town Hall. Please add to the discussion online. And also, as you're listening to our candidates talk about these things, if you've got a question about them, pass them up to the ends, especially if there's something there that they're talking about and you want to know more about. Angela.
When I was president of the Board of Supervisors and the 2 years before, rent control had first come up, and then I co-sponsored several amendments to it. It's an area that is really very difficult to understand in the sense that can you have a tax on future vacancies? I think that's a great idea. You have to balance, of course, the property interest is a constitutional benefit detriment balance, but on the other hand, the city is not livable. There's so many other reasons why people are leaving. I have fought the Ellis Act evictions for years as a discrimination trial lawyer. Believe me, I have fought them for years, and by the way, I win those. And any kind of help or exemption that can be done with the Ellis Act, I am all for it and always will be for it. And everything that Senator Leno did was with the SROs was absolutely incredible, because that also was a place where we would be putting the formerly homeless. But having said that, you know, it isn't just all these rules and regulations that are having people leave San Francisco. There are many reasons people are leaving San Francisco, not the least of which the city is filthy. And that's because DPW doesn't do its job. The city is dangerous for kids. And that's because DPW, again, doesn't do its job. The city has so many poor homeless people living in the streets that it's absolutely unconscionable in $1 billion city. $1 billion city. Our city government is $10 billion. That That is $1 billion is $1,000 million, and it's pretty astronomical. We have $10 billion. We have to do all we can to keep people that make $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in our city, and at the same time, we need to house our formerly homeless people and get them off the streets of our beautiful city and then clean our streets. So I am for anything, especially commercial vacancy control taxes. I mean, why would they be allowed to keep their commercial sites vacant for 6, 7, 8 months when they could easily be rezoned and turned into housing?
Thank
so
you, Ms.
I'm for any
Filiotto.
progressive program that would give more housing in the city and county of San Francisco.
Thank you so much.